I want you to just imagine, some of you this isn't going to be very hard, but I want you to imagine that you're a high school teacher and you're getting paid peanuts, and you are a single income family, you're raising 3 kids, trying to provide for them and your family, and you're just trying to make ends meet, right? And then you meet some folks that you decide you want to trust, and they tell you that they've got a way to change your life. And fast forward a little while, and it turns out these guys are just a bunch of crooks. And as a result of your relationship with them, you lose everything. What would you do? How would you respond? Right? So that's where I was 15 years ago. Today, I'm the Vice President of Learning for an education technology firm, Stu Kent. I'm an education innovator. I invented a teaching model that has completely changed the way that personal financial literacy is taught throughout the country. Right? And I never dreamed that I would ever achieve kind of, what I've done back when I started as a teacher, especially when I saw my very first paycheck, which was pitifully small. All right? Now, before we start, I want to make sure that we understand this title is a little bit deceiving because there's only a very small part of my story that has to do with money, and we're not going to talk a lot about that today. Money is just the medium for the lessons that were delivered through my process and through my growth. Financial challenges that I went through kind of acted as a catalyst for personal change and the inspiration for my teaching model. So before we get too started though, because I am going to talk about my model throughout this presentation, I want to give you just kind of the basic rundown of how it works, just for some context, okay? So in essence, what we would do is I turn your class into an ongoing role-playing game that never ever stops. It's just kind of going on in the background of the course. It's really more of a cultural component to the class. Okay? And it's all based on an economic system where students get paid for being in the course. They've got bills they got to pay, they've got financial goals that they work toward, and they can use their discretionary money to buy privileges in class. Okay? So, for example, if you want full credit on that late work assignment, you've got to buy a voucher. If you want to keep your phone in class, then you're going to have to buy a phone plan. If you got to go to the bathroom, well, you got to pay for that hall pass. How bad you got to pee? Right? Is it worth $50 or can you wait 20 minutes? And then eventually, as they navigate through all this financial choices, a key component in it is that they actually purchase points that go towards their overall grade in class. And this is very critical because it creates opportunity costs and it makes the money real, which we'll get to quite a bit throughout as we go. Long story short, it's very robust, it's quite unique, and if I say so myself, it's amazing, right? Now, all the ideas for this came out of my journey to rebuild my life. And my story can be told through a set of 4 very distinct phases of my life. And the lessons that I learned from them and really how they shaped my educational philosophy made up the foundation and the framework for my teaching model. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive in. So what you see on the screen is a verse of scripture that has taken on some significant meaning in my life. Okay, it actually comes from what's called the Book of Ether, which is a section of the Book of Mormon, not to be confused with the Broadway musical, like the actual Book of Mormon. Okay? And this verse, it's part of God talking to a prophet, and he says, "And if men come unto me, I will show unto them their weakness. I give unto men weakness that they may be humble. My grace is sufficient for all men that humble themselves before me. For if they humble themselves before me and have faith in me, then will I make weak things strong unto them." Now, the reason I share this is because when I first read it, it just hit me. This is a beautiful abridgment of my story, which all boils down to a 4-stage progression, beginning with destructive weaknesses, being humbled, regaining my faith, and eventually becoming strong again. So we're going to go through these 4 phases today in my little speech here. Okay? So the whole thing starts back in 2005, when as a science teacher and the father of 3 little boys, my father passed away. He had liver failure. That's actually the last picture that I took with him before he passed away. And shortly after his passing, I took it pretty hard. My wife and I at the time, we sold our townhome. We moved in with my mother to take care of her, take care of the house. And while I was there, I met a couple of gentlemen who I kind of had elevated into father figure roles. And these gentlemen recruited me into their life/financial coaching firm as one of their students. I became one of their clients. And the whole idea behind their organization was pretty simple. It all boiled down to this concept that they call your soul purpose, right? And basically it was this: everybody is unique with a unique set of skill sets and personality traits that allows them to be able to create value in ways that nobody else can do. And that's your sole purpose. And it's very, it's very compelling, quite romantic, right? Now, in addition to this life coaching, they also did financial coaching, right? And they had what they called a holding fund that their clients could invest into. And so what they would do is they would leverage the personal credit scores of their clients to pull equity out of real estate and take out business loans and lines of credit, right? And then they would invest that money into their fund, and then the profits from that investment would not only cover the payments of all these loans, but the stuff that was the money that was left over could be used to fund the pursuit of our sole purpose, right? And that was kind of their shtick. As you can imagine, turned out to be a pretty fairly elaborate financial scam, somewhat similar to a Ponzi scheme. And by the time that I figured out what was going on, we learned that they had leveraged my personal credit for approximately $1.2 million of debt. Right? As you can imagine, I was pretty devastated. And I felt betrayed by these men. And the whole ordeal triggered a pretty violent downward spiral in my life of depression and anxiety and, quite frankly, some pretty self-destructive behavior. Now, I want to make one thing very clear before we move any further. When I was involved with these guys, and the whole time, I would always talk about how, my goal and my purpose of being involved is because I wanted to provide a better life for my family, right? All the teachers out here, you understand, right? It can be a real challenge trying to make it on a teacher's salary. It's not like we get paid like tons of money, right? For crying out loud, I qualified for food stamps at the time. But here's the thing. At some point, my priorities shifted. The narrative stayed the same, but my priorities shifted, and I became driven by some serious weaknesses. Okay? Not greed per se, at least not at first, but definitely impatience, and I'd probably even say coveting a little bit. Yeah, I wanted wealth. I wanted a grander lifestyle. There's nothing wrong with that, right? My problem was that I saw how these guys were living. I saw the cars they were driving, the homes that they were living in, and I wanted that. I just didn't want to work for it, and I didn't want to wait. I wanted it now. And so when they presented a shortcut to me, I took it. And it cost me everything. Which brings us to our first major lesson, right? I have a favorite quote. It's from Pythagorean. He said that choices are the hinges of destiny. And I love that quote. Because see, I believe, and I've come to realize that choices, decisions, are life's greatest teaching mechanism. Okay, I submit that everything we learn in life is in one way or another accompanied by some form of choice, right? And so when I started looking at how to teach personal finance, I knew that more than any other concept, the decision-making process had to be at the center. See, one of my biggest mistakes in my life was that I didn't really respect the potential outcomes that some of my choices could produce. It was almost as if I treated the whole thing like this big game with a reset button that I could hit if things didn't go the way I wanted, which is an incredibly dangerous attitude in life. And I think it's one of the bigger problems with the games that end up dominating education today. When I built my model, my goal was to realify the experience for my students, not gamify it. Right? They had to make real financial decisions That's why I worked out a way to make the money in my simulated economy real currency. I allowed my students to use it to buy real things that they wanted and real things that they needed, thus making every financial choice a real financial choice. And this concept of realification, it's something that every teacher can do, and I would submit should really rethink about their approach. Right? Are the sources that you're using, the resources you're using in class, the methods that you employ, are they reinforcing practices and habits that are successful in real scenarios? Or are they only successful in a gamified scenario? Right? So now that we've established my weaknesses, let's move on to phase 2. Now that verse at the beginning, it said, I give unto men weakness that they may be humble. And I assure you, dealing with the consequences of my weaknesses was a very humbling experience, because amongst all those weaknesses that I already mentioned of greed and impatience and coveting were my good friends pride and stubbornness. Right? There's this saying here in Texas of hold my beer. And I remember anytime somebody would say I hit rock bottom, I'd be like, yeah, hold my beer. Now give me that jackhammer, we'll show you rock bottom. Right? And eventually, as I spiraled down farther and farther, my depression turned to hatred. I hated those men that ruined my life. I hated my wife who left me in the middle of it all. I hated God for letting it happen. And I hated myself for being so stupid. See, my choices had cost me literally everything. Lost all my possessions, my meager savings. I lost my physical, emotional, mental health. Stress of teaching got to me to the point where I couldn't do that anymore. I had to leave my career for a while. I lost my family. I even lost my religion. I got formally excommunicated from my church because of some of the mistakes and choices that I made. It's a tough pill to swallow. And eventually I even lost the will to keep on going. And this is a picture of the wristband that they gave me at the stabilizing unit of the psychiatric ward of the hospital that they admitted to after my failed suicide attempt. I keep that at my desk, right by my computer. So I see it every day. Because I wanted to remind me that there are depths that a person can get to that I am not immune to. I'm not immune to those kind of vulnerabilities, and I don't want to ever forget that. So I look at that every day. And eventually, hate and pain, it did its job, and it humbled me. And that's when I was ready to actually learn. And that's when one of the most important people in my life, my therapist, Brad, taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. He taught me and he told me, Brian, you have a choice. You can either live your whole life as a victim of a Ponzi scheme, and you'll always be vulnerable for it to repeat. Or you can own it. I could own my part in the events of my life and identify the things that I did wrong. After all, right? I'm the one that signed the papers. I'm the one who didn't fully vet my options. I'm the one that trusted without verifying. Those are things that I can own. And as such, those are things that I can control in the future. There is tremendous power in recognizing the relationship, the causal relationship between our actions and the consequences of them. And so often in education, there seems to be this trend to reinforce the positive and only focus on the good. And those are great things. There's value in those actions. But reality is simple, right? There are two types of things we learn from in this life. The types and things that we did right and the things that we did wrong. And if we only focus on that first group and ignore the second group, we're going to miss out on half our education, right? There are so many things that as a natural consequence of my choices that simply were no longer options for me for a while. And they weren't ever going to be unless my behavior changed. So if choices are life's teaching mechanism, then I submit that opportunity costs are its classroom management system. Right? And again, this is the bedrock of my teaching model. Students learn very, very quickly that through natural consequences of their own decisions, that each and every choice they make opens some doors and closes others. And that the key to success and happiness in life is being able to quickly recognize which doors you value most. And again, this is something every teacher can do, like right away, tomorrow, in your classes. Emphasize the consequences of decisions and allow the natural opportunity costs of student choices to be the enforcer of your classroom management techniques. Okay, so now that I have sufficiently been humbled, I was ready to be molded into something greater. But I needed to believe that I could first, and that's when I met my wife, Becca, who is way more attractive than me. I don't know if you've noticed that yet or not. I love Becca. She believed in me against all odds. And I love to tell the story of our third date. Because we've been dating a little bit here and there, and I felt like it was time that we needed to have a pretty serious conversation. And so I took her to like the worst restaurant I could find. Like I specifically tried to find the Dive. Because I knew no one would be there and I could have a private conversation. So I sit her down and I said, hey, look, if there's any inclination that this is going to go somewhere, there's some things you need to know. And so I just laid it all out there for her. I was like, look, I'm 30-something years old, 9 years older than you. I've got a lot more life experience and some things that you just haven't had yet. I'm a divorcee with 3 kids. I was recently bankrupt, and I literally have nothing to my name. I live in my mom's basement. I'm between jobs. I was excommunicated from your church, and I got some serious emotional and mental health struggles, and I'm going bald. I mean, this has got to be like the greatest dating resume ever, right? Just the kind of guy her parents were like hoping she'd bring home someday. But despite all of that, Becca saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And she helped me find my faith again. My faith in God, my faith in humanity, in relationships, but most importantly, my faith in myself. She helped me realize that I did not need to be defined as some abject failure because of my past choices, but that I had a lifetime of choices still to come, and I could choose to be whoever and whatever I wanted, and that success is arbitrarily defined, and there are countless ways to achieve it. And you better believe that Becca's lessons to me have a place in my teaching model. You see, I realize that there's this entire industry that's kind of stuck in this mode of thinking that we've got to teach students the way to become successful. The problem is that more often than not, teachers are teaching students the path to their definition of success, right? They're teaching them, look, as you navigate the maze of life, when you come to this choice, turn left, turn right, go straight. Problem is, that's not what the maze looks like, right? There isn't only one path, and if you mess up, you're screwed, right? This is what the maze looks like. And sometimes we move forward, sometimes we move sideways, and sometimes we move backwards, and that's okay. The more important lesson is that our students are instilled with a firm belief in their ability to progress, in their ability to learn and grow. And I encourage my students all the time to explore their options, even make mistakes so that we can learn from them together, now, in my class, and not out in the real world where they're playing marbles for keeps, right? So, now with this rich history of lessons about what not to do, coupled with a humble faith in my ability to do something right, I started working on my teaching model. I spent years developing it. And at first I used it in my own classes, which I was talking to the gentleman back there. I used to teach in Tomball, and the way I got that job is that's a wild story. That puts this story to shame, but I digress. Y'all are going to just have to ask them to let me come back next year if you want to hear that. At any rate, so my students, they're participating in my courses using very early versions of my model, but their success, both academically and personally, was tangible and measurable. Right? I had students who just went crazy with their creativity. I had some who, they started businesses in class using the money from the sim to pay each other as they provided tutoring services and other products that they developed. I had some kids who invested in real estate, and they bought all the desks in my class and then rented them out to other kids so they could have places to sit. I even had one kid, this guy, I love him to death. He lost everything in class to a gambling problem. What a tremendous opportunity for him. I am so glad that he learned about those very real tendencies of his in my class and not in real life, right? It didn't take long before word got out and that I was onto something pretty special. And so eventually I started a business so that other schools could use my model too. And that's when the addiction started. The addiction of impact. I know of no more powerful addiction. When I was teaching, I was able to influence and change the lives of hundreds of students with a simple spreadsheet. But when I started my business and we got some real development done, pretty soon we're impacting thousands of students and hundreds of teachers. One of my favorite emails I ever got was an email from a teacher who told me that they had postponed retirement because I had brought new life to their career and they didn't want to stop teaching because they wanted to use my model. It was the best email I've ever got. And then I met the folks at Stu Kent, and their resources and business know-how was a perfect marriage for my teaching model. So I sold my company to them, and now we're literally helping tens of thousands of students every semester. And we're coming up on the 100,000 student mark. See, the lowest point of my life produced one of the greatest accomplishments and most fulfilling contributions that I've ever had in the lives of others. Indeed, you could say that weakness had turned to strength. Now, the reason my teaching model is so successful is not because it's entertaining. It is. That's not why it's successful. It's successful because students are actually fully engaged in application of learning. They make real financial choices, and they do it in the safe environment of the classroom, which is something that I never had. My strength is a direct result of my choices, and the biggest mistakes of my life did not ruin me. They brought me even greater strength through humility and renewed faith. And now these philosophies that I had to kind of learn the hard way, things like learn as a result of ownership and accountability, how to leverage opportunity costs in life to make wiser decisions, and that there is no one right way to be successful. So you know what? Don't get stuck because you didn't achieve someone else's definition. And now I get to share these concepts in a way that other teachers can utilize and implement to their fullest, to the benefit of their students year after year. My story could have gone in many directions, and so I kind of want to revisit the title of my speech, From Bankrupt Teacher to Millionaire Entrepreneur. I hope you realize I wasn't talking about the money. Money's nice, I'm not gonna lie. Money's great. But I was talking about happiness. The lesson of my story isn't really about money, it's about growth and becoming rich in happiness and fulfillment. And hopefully, I can be an example to others that with the right perspective and a lot of hard work, anyone can turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. Thank you.